Good afternoon, and thank you to each of you for joining us today. My name is Kristina Hook. I am the Executive Director of the Better Evidence Project in the Center for Peacemaking Practice at George Mason University's Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution. I want to extend a warm welcome to each of you, as well as to our speaker today, Dr. Margarita Tadevosyan. A few housekeeping notes as we begin today's session. We do ask that you would keep your audio set to mute, as this does help the stability of our session today. We would also like to tell you that we will record today's session and post the video of it on our website. Our website is betterevidenceproject.squarespace.com, or you can reach out to bep@gmu.edu to access this video, to read Dr. Tadevosyan's full report, or to be connected to our hub, as well as all of the other activities, research, and community events that we are hosting. We did want to let you know that at the Better Evidence Project, we feel it's a big part of our goal to reach people in the peace building field from many different areas of expertise. We love working with scholars, practitioners, policymakers, and donors. And so we host a lot of different events intended to reach and to stretch us as we represent these different fields. Today is one of our research-themed events, and we're very proud to launch the report of Dr. Tadevosyan on this event of International Organization Intervention. So at the Better Evidence Project, we were launched this year at the request of 36 different policymakers, practitioners, donors, and scholars who had identified 2 priority areas for research. They said that our field collectively needed to develop a shared set of key measures to describe peace-building successes and effectiveness, and that we needed to learn from local peace-building successes and develop and communicate a stronger evidence base on the effectiveness of locally led peace building. We're so excited about the original research that was done by one of our scholars and residents to answer this and to talk about that with our audience today. We know that many of you are also bringing with you a wonderful set of experience and expertise, and so we would invite you at any point in today's session to participate in the Q&A that will be at the end of the event. At any point during the presentation, you can write either a question, a topic, or your name into the chat feature located at the bottom of the screen. And at the end of our session, I'll invite you to address your question directly to Dr. Tadevosyan. So without further ado, I want to give her a warm welcome. We're so grateful that she did this research, that she's here to talk about it. And I'd like to give just a few words of introduction regarding your very distinguished background. So Dr. Margarita Tadevosyan is a postdoctoral fellow in the Carter School Center for Peacemaking Practice. She is a scholar practitioner of conflict resolution and has extensive experience in convening and facilitating Track 2 reconciliation workshops, primarily in the South Caucasus. For many years, she has been collaborating with Dr. Susan Allen, who is also the principal investigator at the Better Evidence Project. And they've been partnering on facilitating conflict resolution workshops across the Georgian-South Ossetian conflict divide. She has also been involved in other forms of analytical work and conflict resolution practice in the South Caucasus, working with Armenian and Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict contexts. She joined the Carter School as full-time research faculty in 2020 after spending a year conducting privately funded research on preventing violent conflict and teaching as an adjunct faculty at the School of International Service at American University. Dr. Tadevosyan is a Carter School alumna with a PhD earned in 2019. Her current research centers on generating improved evidence on preventing violent conflict, ensuring it is available to donors, policymakers, practitioners, and scholars in the peace-building community. As a postdoctoral fellow of the Center's Better Evidence Project, she is working on research that will provide a wide range community of stakeholders with a better understanding of local conflict prevention and violence reduction practices, and we'll be continuing to generate updated new evidence on the local perspective of the effectiveness of peace processes. Having read the full report, I know that for those of you who haven't, you're in for a real treat, both with the presentation we'll read today, and I hope with the report that you will read later on our website. Um, Today, Dr. Tadevosyan will be talking to us, as I said, on this topic of successful prevention efforts that significantly reduce the outbreak of conflict in 18 cases, as well as highlighting how these findings might be applied elsewhere. Without further ado, I want to open up the floor now for Dr. Tadevosyan to begin her presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kristina. Thank you everyone for joining, and I am very happy to be part of the great team at the Better Evidence Project with Dr. Kristina Hook and Dr. Susan Allen, working on at least trying to find ways that we can reduce violence and do better work. I am originally from Armenia, and those of you who follow events know that there can't be a better time. A worse but a better time to start looking for ways that we can impact reduction of violence around the world. So I will start sharing my screen so you can all kind of see the presentation. So my research focused on prevented wars and looked at specifically the role of international organizations and how they what role they played in a successful intervention and prevention of the conflict. As I said, why we're looking at the conflict prevention. Conflicts were on the rise in 90s and 80s, and then there was a significant period of decline. However, in recent years, we see a significant escalation of conflict around the world, both in their sheer number of people who are involved in it and also hotspots that are emerging. At the same time, conflict prevention is not a new topic. There has been around, and even international organizations like UN were formed around the idea of preventing future violent conflict. At the same time, when you look at the literature and what we see in terms of conflict prevention, there is an ambiguity of definitions and approaches in conflict around conflict prevention. What it should look like? Should we look at the only preventing the conflict from escalating, or we should be addressing more structural issues that are that underline every single conflict? It seems, again, from the review of the literature, that there is an asymmetric preference, at least towards the more instrumental prevention of the conflict, where we're looking at trying to curb the spread of the violence or stop it from escalating. There is much less attention, I guess, is paid to more structural prevention and creating conditions and environments where conflicts will not arise on the first place. Some reasons behind it are obvious. Structural prevention takes more time commitment, human resources commitment, commitment of funds, and with everything that's going on in the world, it seems that there is lack of resources that are being pulled in different directions. This particular report, in terms of methodology, it is it's a qualitative desk review of secondary documents, and I investigated 18 cases in different time frames, and I looked at the work of 4 major international organizations that were carrying or being the lead organizations in those cases. It is the United Nations, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, the Organization of American States, and the Commonwealth. So these were the 4 major organizations whose work I have reviewed in this particular cases. You can see the cases that I have investigated. I have to mention that obviously there are some limitations with this. You can see that these cases are basically confined in a certain historical period. And for example, if we look here, Yemen in 2011 was very different than Yemen is now. The same goes to Ukraine. That was very different in the period before 2000, before the annexation of Crimea and the war in the eastern Ukraine. But again, these are contained in the time and space for that matter, with a hope that we can actually see certain patterns that emerge and apply them or try to extract also lessons learned from it. Um, Obviously, as I said, limitations are the study was based on a review of secondary sources, different reports of international organizations, analytical articles, and I did not have the opportunity to be engaged directly or collect more fresh or original data for the cases or the specific cases that I was investigating. And also I was looking at the role of particular lead organizations, international interagency organizations, and I have not scrutinized or included any work of other actors, including maybe international non-governmental organizations who are involved and who were involved in this type of work, other academics and research practitioners. So this report, again, covers only the work of major lead politically driven international organizations. So I was able to identify several key factors that I want to talk about in detail about each of them. And then again, given I was not planning to kind of structure my presentation this way, but I feel that after what's happened in case of Armenia and Azerbaijan, I felt that I need to also kind of draw some parallels and show how lack of each of these factors or lack of paying attention to these factors actually in some way contributed to the outbreak of violence in the region. So in a way, it kind of serves as an indirect proof that if we had done or engaged in some of these activities, there would have been possibly an opportunity to reduce the outbreak of violence. So first factor that theme that emerged from reviewing all of these cases are the local factors of prevention. Basically, is the door open or closed in this sense? The international organizations and the way that we operate in this global world, we are still very much dependent on the sovereignty of the states, and there should be in order for the international organization to be able to enter the scene, there should be some type of invitation or access granted by the by the host governments in the particular region. I was able to kind of distinguish between two categories of local factors, which one I call the active factors, and the other is called, I prefer to call the passive factor. And then the active factors in their on their end can be direct and indirect. What I do mean by active local factors in this context are the actions and statements that are made by the representative of conflict parties that signal their readiness to have the international organization step in and engage in some type of preventive work. And they, as I mentioned, they can be direct or indirect. And in this case, direct factors are the ones that are open and then explicit invitation by host governments. For example, in case of Estonia, the Estonian government reached out to the OSCE and asked for the intervention. The same way in Guyanese elections, the Guyanese government reached out to OAS, Organization of the American States, asking to send election monitors. So, which was an important foundation for all those interventions to happen. At the same time, we should not, as interveners or organizations, we should not wait for that invitation to come or that initiative to come out from the conflict-affected countries, but also be proactive in approaching the leadership with an offer to help, which was the case, for example, in Yemen, when everything was happening in Yemen. UN Secretary General actually approached the president of Yemen and asked for a possibility of sending a fact-finding mission to the country to understand what is going on. So those are the important engagement mechanism in that sense. The other set of factors that again kind of describe the field that or kind of frame the field that for the intervention are the active but indirect local factors. And in this case, political composition, social and political composition of the state is an important factor, key factor that allows for intervention to start or successfully move forward. And the part of it is the presence of moderate or pragmatic elements within the government. Obviously, it is very difficult to engage with a type of government that is completely comprised of hardliners. There are no elements or there are no individuals who are willing to at least discuss any possibility of the compromise or any possibilities of foreign intervention. So again, presence of the moderates in the government is an important factor that allowed, in most of the interventions that were successful, were allowed for intervention to go forward. One of the key cases was Macedonia, where they had moderates that were willing to engage with the OSCE mission and the Higher Commissioner on Human Rights there. And at the same time, in Malawi, there were elements during the conflict in Malawi. There were elements in the opposition, and both in opposition and in the government, that were again willing to accept the foreign intervention and look for ways of finding out a way out of this crisis. And another kind of factor in this category is the strong political will to be committed to the peace process and not fall apart after the first kind of unsuccessful process. And Colombia, for that matter, serves as a good example where FARC and the government showed sustained political will to be engaged in the process and see the process through. Again, these are some things that the international community has to follow through and try to identify once investigating or looking at the environment that they're engaging in. In comparison or in contrast to the active factors, I was able to also identify several factors that I prefer to call passive local factors. Those are the events and activities that occur within a given conflict environment that kind of shape or create permissive or non-permissive environments to happen. So one of the, interestingly enough, and this is a very kind of anecdotal and in a way very interesting approach, is the absence of key spoilers from the field. And this, for example, in Guyana, there is a general consensus about among the people who were involved in working with Guyana that the ability of the mission to register success and move forward was the assassination attempt against the president that triggered his flight out of country and kind of created an opening for the intervention to start, because he was considered to be a very hardliner that would never probably agreed to any type of intervention. So his kind of deliberate departure that was not planned, obviously, by the interveners, created a space for engagement. On the other hand, let's say absence of key spoilers is also can be attributed to a fact that some key actors may in the specific time frame decide not to engage for various reasons. That was the case in Ukraine, for example, in late 1990s and early 2000s, when the Yeltsin administration at that time in early 90s chose not to play any active role in the issue of minorities and Russian minority in Crimea, and was basically not helping, but at the same time not obstructing any type of engagement. The recent developments in Ukraine showed us how presence of key spoilers can actually derail the process and have a result that we have currently in Eastern Ukraine and in Crimea. So again, like the absence of key spoilers is an important factor that frames the intervention environment and allows for the process to go on. Based on what the cases that reviewed cases allowed me to kind of see, I was able to extrapolate maybe some general recommendations for the intervening community and researchers and scholars to look for in the case in the intervention cases. And I just want to say that every factor that I have identified will be followed by a set of recommendations specific to that particular factor. So the first one that I came up with, it is we should probably, as an intervener, should not wait for the country, not always we have to wait for the country to reach out or the host government to reach out for with a request to intervene, but we should be more proactive in leveraging our authority, the authority and the position of an organization to offer support and de-escalate the tension of the conflict. Trying to find and develop relationship with the pragmatic voices within a conflict party, with an understanding that sometimes these people cannot be easily accessible. Some of them can be in the form of political prisoners in a certain country, given their political context. At the same time, the international intervener organizations should use their reputation, resources, and expertise to try and soften positions of the conflict parties and support some degree of moderation. Providing positive reinforcement for sustained commitment and strong political will, and encouraging the parties to remain engaged even after unsuccessful attempts of mediation or unsuccessful attempts of previous engagements is key and important for creating the peace or prevention conducive local environment, and also developing workable solutions of how to isolate the potential spoilers or create a separate spaces of engagement for them, so they still feel that they are being engaged, but at the same time they are not in a position any longer to derail the entire peace process or prevention process. So again, how we deal with the spoilers and how we engage them by find creative ways of engaging them but not marginalizing them where they will be a bigger spoiler is an important consideration for the international interveners. I want to move to the next factor, which is early engagement. And I want to make sure that we see the distinction between early warning and early engagement. While in some cases, I have seen these terms used interchangeably in some ways. However, I believe that they are distinctly different. We can see the early warning signs, we can recognize them. However, early engagement is a completely different story in this case. It is basically refers to the ability of the international organization to be on the ground and be engaged as early as possible without allowing for that gap or the vacuum to be created after we were able to recognize the early engagement. And again, the case of Estonia and Macedonia provide a good examples of how early engagement worked, that the mission was on the ground only a couple of weeks after the first request for it was made. So that's an important characteristic. And there is a consensus general in the policy circles and people who are, let's say, working on the case of Yemen in 2011, that the ability of the UN Secretary General to dispatch the fact-finding mission only a couple of weeks after the first violence broke out in the country was key to setting the tone and providing the engagement mechanisms for the local, both political parties and the international community to be on the ground. In this sense, we should look at the early engagement in two kind of ways and try to do early engagement as a function, basically being able to respond quickly and bypassing some bureaucratic regulations or creating processes that would allow for those regulations to be more flexible. At the same time, we should look at the early engagement as a structural element, and it is very important in terms of the structural element built into the bureaucracies of this organizations, because for example, organizations such as UN, from the time that something is brought to the attention to the point when, let's say, the peacekeepers or whoever is on the ground, there is a very long process that goes through, and sometimes we can lose the opportunity or the window, the opening or the opportunity window that was presented to us. So, and again, OSCE as a maybe much smaller organization and mostly like working within localized European setting provides a good example of how the early engagement can find its way in terms of being a structural element. In this case, the Higher Commissioner of Human Rights and National Minorities within the Higher Commission of National Minorities in the as part of the OSCE, it has the ability as a structure within the OSCE bureaucratic structure to make certain decisions on his own without waiting for the approval from the headquarters in Vienna from OSCE, which allows him again to be more proactive and be more mobile in that sense. So these are basically some considerations to have that it's not only important to recognize the early warning signs, but it's also important to act on them in early way to prevent the spread of violence. And again, several recommendations that kind of stem from this part of the research is that international organizations should leverage their organizational resources and structures to support the early engagement as much as possible. Sometimes it's understood that robust new structures needed to be in place, but also we need to be very careful, like very knowledgeable about other structural mechanisms that are already in place that can be leveraged without additional burden on the organization and its processes to facilitate the early engagement. Again, development of internal policies and structures that can help alleviate some bureaucratic constraints and shorten the time between the time for the reaction to certain crisis situations can be very helpful. And again, I have singled out OSCE as a organization that seems to offer some guidance or some pathway towards how other organizations can probably have similar structural elements that can be helpful in early engagement sense. Another factor that kind of was emerging, or another theme that was emerging from all this reviewed cases was the ability of the intervening organization to have a comprehensive approach to conflict. And this particular element goes more in line with the structural prevention rather than operational prevention. However, in my view, it kind of blends both of them, trying to introduce some structural element to mostly operational prevention. So in this case, comprehensive approach implies working and coordinating with a wide range of actors and engaging with conflict issues through education, technical training, confidence building measures, dialogue, and other actions. And there are kind of key components to this to this comprehensive approach. First of all, one thing that stood out to me in very successful cases of prevention, which there is general consensus that the Baltic states, after the dissolution of Soviet Union, and some parts of former Yugoslav Republic were one of those very successful cases of prevention. And in those cases, if we look, there was an anchor issue that was holding all the intervention together. In particular, for those cases, it was the human rights issue and having the national higher commissioner or national minorities be engaged in monitoring the situation with the human rights and addressing those issues and anchoring the entire preventive effort around a specific issue that resonated with both with all the conflict parties was an important way of creating this meaningful intervention that people were happy about. Another such case in terms of creating a strong anchor was in case of Guyana, there was I'm sorry, in case of Guinea, there was an issue that the community or society in Guinea was lacking the sense of a meaningful justice system, and working and anchoring the intervention around creating meaningful and legitimate justice process was seen as something that kind of hold the center together and held the intervention in place and was able to register success. Another aspect in this comprehensive approach is very careful consideration of the linkages that exist. And I have to say that while comprehensive approach means that we are looking at a lot of things at the same time, however, it is in terms of like the wording, it is not as self-evident. And I would say that by comprehensive approach in this particular case, I also mean the ability to recognize the linkages at the same time trying to delink highly political issues and create separate platforms for them in order not to hold other issues hostage to highly political negotiations, and be able to register success in other cases that can at some point or either induce some stability or become the locomotive for the rest of the intervention to kind of follow and be more successful. This were the case in case of the South Sudan referendum, where there was an ability to kind of link highly political processes from other issues that were able to register success. And in this sense, and finally, the very last kind of small aspect in this comprehensive approach to preventive intervention is to develop the exit strategy that is based on the progress rather than a such time frame. There is a tendency of the international community, again, given the time constraint, given other things that are happening around the world, and given the funding constraints, and also push from their own constituencies in their European or Western headquarters, to have an exit strategy that is defined by a certain day or certain very low kind of benchmarks, but the cases demonstrate, for example, again in Baltic states, that a strategy, the OSCE strategy, there was built on the exit strategy was built on an actual progress achieved, rather a date, which helped for more sustainable intervention, and it also helped with sustaining the focus, momentum, and interest of all parties. So it is not only we always emphasize the need for the commitment by local actors, both on the national and local level. However, one thing that is less obvious or is being less talked about is the commitment by the intervener himself, or to be engaged in the process in a meaningful way without rushing to exit the field. In this case, I have two very specific recommendations where we, again, identifying one or two central issues within a specific conflict environment that can be used for as an anchor for the intervention and generate greater traction in a local, with the locals on, again, both local and the national level, and also separate conflict issues and cast wider net for the preventive action. This possibly can help us to cover not only a larger geography of the issues, but at the same time larger geography in terms of like pure geographic sense and the territory, and facilitate more inclusive and participatory preventive intervention. Moving to another important category that I was able to identify is the engagement with the host government. There is a tendency in the community to, especially if we're dealing with highly corrupt or militarized or government, to ostracize them, to marginalize them. However, that only providing sticks to the government does not help with sustainability of the preventive action and its ability to reduce violence, as it creates a very strong self-defense reaction from the host government to kind of fight back any intervention. And again, given the fact that we're mostly operating within the concept of state sovereignty, and peace enforcement operations are very rare compared to other type of more constructive interventions, having ways, constructive ways to engage with the government is a critically important. So identifying the right incentives that can help or can resonate with the self-interest of the government is a key component here. Also trying to provide avenues to maintain faith and legitimacy for the government, incumbent government, is an important fact. A lot of times any outside intervention is seen as a way to delegitimize, or is perceived by the local government or local authorities as a way to delegitimize their positions and their views. So providing a way that a meaningful kind of engagement way, and providing a ladder for them to de-escalate the process themselves is a key consideration. At the same time, we also, as interveners, have to create very realistic expectations of what this intervention can yield in terms of the benefits, the personal and individual benefits of the for the country, and also personal and individual benefits of those who are involved. I think this was clearly articulated in the case of engagement in the Kyrgyzstan, when there was a component within the UN development programs intervention, which was called Infrastructure for Peace. However, they were very clear. The UN resident coordinator had several purposeful meetings with the president of Kyrgyzstan, as well as the higher leadership, to make sure that what UN meant by infrastructure for peace was about creating processes of governance and social structures, rather than repairing any damaged infrastructures like roads and providing like tangible basic infrastructure relief to the country. So again, it also helps to create this open and honest relationship where the host government does not feel that it has been tricked in some type of cooperation without tangible outcomes. And also based on a cultural specific characteristics of a country, developing trustworthy and personal relationships with the key interlocutors is an important. This goes again with those cultures, let's say in the Middle East, even in the South Caucasus, where people that hold key leadership positions have the need to feel personally important. And so developing those type of relationships in a balanced way that does not reinforce their sometimes unconstructive positions, but emphasizing their importance to the process is a key component that, for example, in Lebanon played a big role in the ability of the UN to de-escalate the situation and help Lebanese government to deal with this increased tension within the society that it was facing with the influx of Syrian refugees after the crisis broke out in Syria. So several recommendations within this context include identifying appropriate and strong incentives to bring the formal leadership of a country to a cooperation table. While application of sanctions can be effective, at the same time, there should be built-in mechanisms to signal ways that how the sanctions can turn into, or can either be lifted or turn into positive reinforcements for the local leadership. Build personal relationship with key interlocutor when possible, especially in those cultural contexts where the personas and those personal connections matter. And also an important characteristic is to communicate through non-ambiguous messaging and setting appropriate expectations for the local counterparts. I think this a non-ambiguous and united messaging is understated factor in a way that international community and then intervenor itself has to work with its own partners internationally to make sure that the signals and the messaging around a certain conflict context is united, which will help to not only push forward the preventive measures, but also prevent create development of destructive alliances with the participation of the one of the parties of the conflict, for that matter. Which this actually leads, kind of segues very well into the discussion of coordination and leveraging the capacity of the right organization. And then in this case, jumping a little forward, I would say that in this particular case, what I mean by coordination is more coordination not only among the local actors, but also coordination among the international community to make sure that they don't step on each other's toes or have programs and activities that overlap. Important component here is to understand and realistically assess who is the better positioned or better equipped organizations to be the lead organization in a particular case. Based on the core issue at the conflict, the historical context or expertise, there can be different organizations from the list of all available international intervenors and can be better positioned in this sense. For example, again, OSCE had a much stronger human rights, national minority profile and played a critical role in the conflict context where this was the underlying factor for the conflict to erupt in the first place. At the same time, for example, in Fiji, with the history of Commonwealth engagement and the colonial kind of past, there was a shared consensus that Commonwealth had a better was better positioned to offer its support and guidance to the conflict parties to overcome the coups, military coups in the country. Similarly, the Organization of American States involvement in the case of Belize and Guatemala was seen as, again, as a regional organization who has a better understanding of the conflict context and also the historical kind of context. So again, looking at who can be the best organization and leveraging their expertise is key, instead of just having a desire as an international intervener to be included in the process. So going back to the importance of coordination, I would say that the coordination of the effort is between the intervening organizations and making sure that they are not running different parallel processes that can be counterproductive and actually incite more violence, but they need to work on ensuring the complementarity of the effort and covering as much issue and geography and topography in that sense, like that they can to successfully mitigate against spreading of the violence. And again, as I said in my previous comment, united messaging is an important component. Trying, and in this particular case, when I say united messaging, would emerge from the reviewed cases is not only the united messaging of, let's say, different international organizations and international actors, but at the same time involving the immediate neighbors and immediate geopolitical kind of context and neighborhood of a given country to be on the board and be supportive of the same type of united messaging. So it goes like from not only from the global scale, but also trying, working with the immediate neighbors of a conflict-affected countries where they can be, they can add their voices to this international community's voice on united messaging. In this, for this particular factor, the several key considerations or recommendations for the future use was to conduct an assessment of core conflict issues and determine the entity that is best positioned to carry out the intervention. And again, historical context, the history of previous engagement, the key expertise of an organization are key factors that can determine which organization is best situated to help. Attempt to, as much as possible, to achieve the complementarity of effort and leverage the strength of individual organizations, and also develop and foster cooperation and coordination platform within and between conflicting parties. This is again when it goes to engage not only the locally based conflict parties and their constituencies, but also trying to bring in relevant actors in the regional context. Engagement structure. This component that I was struggling a lot how to frame this in terms of just wording of it, and I opted for engagement structure as a category, in which case I want to say that, in my opinion, the report adds two additional elements to the engagement structure, as we know. So these two components are what I call the solid conflict analysis, and also prioritizing national initiatives. So in terms of solid conflict analysis, seems very obvious that any intervention has to be built on a conflict analysis. However, it is surprising how much it is not in general, and how much international organizations rush into action without having substantial, strong, updated conflict analysis. This was a case in Kyrgyzstan when they have spent so much money on different initiatives, and then it with very minimal impact, and then eventually it was recognized that they were lacking updated conflict analysis, solid conflict analysis that would actually identify key grievances, also key actors, and would help to direct the resources and efforts in the right direction. Based on the original data collected in Bolivia, for example, by UN, it became foundation of the intervention, and also made access to that data by UN, made them an important interlocutor with the host government, when the host government itself was looking to UN to get critically needed information for their own development and budgeting purposes. So again, the solid conflict analysis that is based on original data can help to strengthen the position of an intervening organization as key constructive interlocutor in this case. Also prioritizing national initiatives, again, in the case of Bolivia and Colombia in particular, this was important, because UN in that case was happy to play kind of take the back seat and lead, support this nationally led processes from the back, and not be up front and center, and provide the necessary logistical support and expertise support that strengthened the nationally led processes. So again, based on the some evidence provided from this 18 cases, I would say that several recommendations that I was able to come up with is that critical importance of robust, relevant conflict analysis. When possible, international organizations must engage in fact-finding missions with explicit purpose of soliciting information from a very wide range of actors that goes beyond the capital cities, and trying to engage to branch out and be as locally represented as possible. already existing processes should be scrutinized and supported whenever they are relevant, instead of creating new parallel processes. And one thing that kind of is always a problematic area is the ability to engage and recognize the potential of the locally employed staff and utilizing them as a key resource to gain access to local networks, political leadership, and community leadership. There's a tendency to think that local staff can be biased and will be not perceived objectively with certain degree. While to a certain degree that is true, at the same time they have access to critical information, to people, and also their local own knowledge of local context and language is unparalleled and unmatched on the international level, which should be again utilized. And finally, I want to move to my final kind of comment, final factor, which is the reputability of the intervener in general, which in this case kind of comes into two has two built-in components. First of all, is the persona of the intervener. Who is the face of the intervention? The person, the special representative, the envoy, the person who is dispatched on a fact-finding mission. His personality is critically important. His nationality is important given the context, historical context of the conflict. His knowledge, or his or her knowledge and expertise within the conflict region, within the region and the conflict is critically important, and his ability to speak the skills and have the language is important. So, for example, in the case of Yemen, the envoy, the special envoy, was Jamal Ben Omar, who was Moroccan by his origin. He spoke Arabic very fluently, but also what resonated in that particular case with the majority of the of the conflict parties, especially youth, who was kind of behind leading the action and revolution in Yemen, was that Ben Omar, when he was young himself, was engaged in the social movements against his own government in Morocco. So it gave him a lot of legitimacy and kind of framed him as a person who would understand the type of engagement or the type of processes that this youth is being engaged in. So again, the personality of the lead persona of intervention should not be underestimated. And the second component of the reputability of the intervener is the credibility of the intervening organization. In this case, the public perception of the organization is an important consideration. Some people have very skewed or negative perceptions of certain organizations based on the previous engagement or previous history, either in their own country or in the region. So previous engagement is an important, but also the intervening organizations can take actions and steps to boost their public image by trying to solicit active feedback and trying to be inclusive in understanding the grievances, fears, hopes of the population that they are trying to help. In this sense, not limiting the engagement or presence to the capital city or one or two major cities is an important component, because it makes the rest of the country and the rest of the population feel neglected and not included in the overall peace process. So, and then finally, one key element, and then I think I've seen this in my own experience as well, when working in the South Caucasus, involvement of uncontested subject matter experts in technical and implementation of certain issues helps to boost the credibility of the preventive intervention. For example, in case of Guatemala and Belize, the dispute was it was a land dispute, and the involvement of the Pan American Institute of History and Geography with their ability to provide precise data that was seen as unbiased and very technical, helped to, again, OAS to be considered as an organization that is able to bring this unbiased and critically needed expertise. So again, based on this observations, several recommendations, the careful selection of the face of intervenor intervention is an important, looking where he worked previously or she worked previously, what type of public perception is there about his persona is a key consideration. Trying to involve high reputable sources when possible, including world-renowned, recognized experts on certain relevant issues. And this works very well when we're talking about technical expertise. Let's say water sharing, environmental, epidemiological, things that are in a sense more or less apolitical. And then again, the intervener has to understand and not take for granted that everybody would want his intervention or everybody would have a positive image about the intervener, and try proactively to create feedback platforms to get the feedback from the population about what are the expectations from this type of processes, what is the public perception about his organization's image, and how it can be built, further enhanced and built into the preventive mechanism as well. So just to quickly recap this kind of, in order to support preventive action, several key areas based on this research are local factors, ability to engage early, ability to have a comprehensive approach, the the ability to engage with the government in a meaningful way, coordinate and choose the right organization who has the right expertise to do the work, look at the strengthening of the engagement structure by prioritizing national initiatives and creating and having a robust, updated conflict analysis, and then choosing correctly who is the lead, lead phase. And very quickly, again, as I said in the beginning, I think like reviewing and like kind of reflecting on what happened in case of Armenia and Azerbaijan in this recent 45, 50 days, I can say that local factors were completely ignored, and the windows of opportunities that emerged here and there at different periods of time were not exploited. Even when the violence broke out, the international community waited for the conflict parties to reach out, and there was no meaningful way of offering to step in, rather than just facilitating some type of meetings between the foreign ministers. And the only party that stepped in at a very late was Russia with President Putin, which ended up with the situation that we have today. It did not allow going back to the engagement with the government. Any face-saving mechanism, the agreement that was reached does not build any face-saving mechanism for the Armenian side, which, apart from the conflict with Azerbaijan, does not create a very significant destabilization within Armenia itself in the political field. And there is very big division in the country that a couple years ago only was priding itself in registering democratic success. Reputability of the intervener in this case, again, there are very ambiguous feelings about Russia in general and Putin's persona in particular. So again, that can have a very significant destabilizing effect for going forward in this context. Just being cognizant of the time, I'll just stop here, and I welcome any questions that you have about this presentation, or in particular about the ongoing conflict, but I would rather keep it to this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll invite you to stop sharing the screen so that we can engage again with our audience. Thank you very much. And I wanted to tell our audience that I've included a link in the chat where you can access the full report. Every time I go through your data, I get another insight. And I do appreciate in particular how you've broken down the recommendations in these different areas. I know that I can see with our participant list that we've really gathered a group that has a lot of experience in various aspects that your presentation talks to. So I want to remind our audience that the Q&A session is now open. And again, to ask a question, you can type the question or simply type your name into the chat list, and we'll call in the order that we receive them. And I'll invite you to either write your question or if you'd like to direct your question to Dr. Tadevosyan directly, and then that way we'll try to get as much engagement as we can in our new Zoom-based world. To start that off, I would really appreciate you helping us understand what unifies all the components, the elements, and the context that you've highlighted in your work. So what can practitioners and policymakers learn from it? And again, as you speak, we'll invite others in the audience to begin asking their own questions.
I think one thing that unifies all of these cases, they're geographically very much dispersed. They're dispersed also in their historical time frame. What unifies all of them is at some point they were successful. And again, I'm saying at some point because we've seen things go differently for some of these cases, things holding positively for some of them. Or most of them, I guess. So one, going forward, I think what needs to be like a lesson learned for the international community, I believe, is the ability to not have just a checkbox of things, but have a very purposeful process of reflection on each of these components and careful consideration of them in general. And again, with the danger of running into another checklist that we have to tick off, I think what needs to happen is a more complex and comprehensive thinking around if, let's say, I have this intervention and I'm putting this person in charge, how he will be received. If I'm assuming that the human rights or lack of water sharing is driving this conflict, is it my assessment, or this is what data that is collected from locals tells me? What is the government perception about the organization that will be intervening, and are they willing, will I be met with a public campaign against my intervention, as it happens in some cases? So I think it's a toolbox in general of thinking more comprehensively about some aspects of intervention that in many cases you would think are very obvious, but as the example shows, are not purposefully reflected on in many cases that of the intervention and attempts to mediate we see around the world.
Thank you for that. We've now had a really rich question come in from, I believe it's Nar. Would you like to ask your question directly? Do you have the technological capacity to do so, or should I read it out? If I'm getting the name correctly, I think it's coming from Nar.
Not, yeah.
Okay.
Just
so I'll go ahead and read that so our whole audience can hear. We have a question that's come in that said, "Hi, Dr. Tadevosyan. You spoke about this a little bit, but you mentioned in the opening that local factors of conflict prevention include invitation or willingness to grant access by local leaders. But nonetheless, international humanitarian groups should also be proactive about asking to be involved. Given the repeated requests by the ombudsmen of
Artsakh?
For humanitarian groups to observe, monitor, etc., which we understand went completely unanswered by most groups, most notably by any UN groups. Can you speak about why there was a lack of intervention in the recent fighting between the Artsakh Defense Forces and the Azerbaijan military? Specifically, many of us are wondering why several international groups whose goals are to prevent conflicts and avoid humanitarian crises did not uphold these stated missions.
That's a good question. And again, answering as an Armenian to this question will be difficult and challenging. And again, I'm sure some people will think that my positions are biased. And obviously, I do accept my inherent bias when it comes to the conflict of Armenia between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But as I mentioned in my opening statement, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know how to say, but in this case, unfortunately, international organizations operate within the premise of international recognizing the sovereignty of the country. And given the fact that the Artsakh is recognized internationally as a part of the territory of sovereign state of Azerbaijan, it makes it difficult for international organizations that have international political affiliation or are based on the sense of nation state, feel like kind of around, are centered around nation state, the same way the OSCE is or the UN is, to be involved without having to ask for the permission from the Azerbaijani government, which for obvious reasons was not interested in allowing any type of monitoring to happen. At the same time, I want to underscore that our organizations like Human Rights Watch or International Amnesty International that are nation state bound organizations, are more like transnational in their sense, were able to issue reports and speak out about the violations, or if you want to call them war crimes that were going on, and human rights violations in the midst of the fighting in Artsakh. Unfortunately, I can't say that this question has a clear answer, but what I am trying to propagate, I guess, here is for the international organizations, be they those nation state bound or more humanitarian and non like bipartisan in a sense, to continue to be engaged regardless of the type of response they receive. For example, in case of Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh, while they were not able to travel to some of them, or were not willing or couldn't travel to Artsakh to do the fact-finding mission. Other possibility would be to be in Armenia proper or Azerbaijan proper and interview people directly who fled and try to inform future intervention attempts. Again, given the COVID-19 and everything that was going on, it played some role in it. Obviously, I'm not sure how much. But again, I think the biggest thing that kind of holds us back in this situation is the continued operation on the concept of sovereignty, which hinders in many cases the ability of international organizations to engage early.
Thank you. I appreciate you engaging with these very difficult, and I know in this case, personal questions. As we wait for other questions to come in from the audience, I hope that you'll be gracious enough to stay on the hot seat and let me play devil's advocate for a moment. So you're advocating for a very interesting and somewhat contested approach of engaging the international structures and governments of conflict-affected countries. So sometimes this approach means engaging known human rights abusers, war criminals, and other offenders. Have you considered how this can negatively impact and empower these actors to continue their destructive activities? And so what is your response to that? In particular, how might this approach negatively impact the standing of the intervenor and potentially contribute to future conflict dynamics?
That's a very good question, and thank you for that. Yes, the it is a controversial approach, and people can criticize this approach for those things that you have highlighted. And at the same time, I believe that without an ability to uh, push out those destructive spoilers, um, the only option that we have as an international community to try and find ways of engaging them. And as I mentioned, a, an important consideration here is to find ways of probably creating separate platforms of engagement for them. That way, keeping them away from other structural elements of our preventive intervention, trying to uh, influence their thinking around the conflict. And I'll go back again and say that go back again and refer to the case of Armenia and Azerbaijan, how much we, regardless how much we consider the president of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, being an unconstructive, um, uh, a very abusive dictatorial leader in Azerbaijan, he is the recognized leader of Azerbaijan, and given the current situation, has some popular support, and he is able to rally his supporters and also the population of Azerbaijan around certain issues. And we should look for ways of engaging his credibility, however big or small it is within his country, to impact the positive change. Let's say if he is the person who is behind the anti-Armenian rhetoric in Azerbaijan, trying to change his rhetoric will also help to that the rhetoric to be on change rhetoric to be on the TV and be in kind of absorbed by his followers and public. Is it a controversial position? Obviously it is. Is it is there a possibility of it not working? Obviously there is. But again, we're looking at the alternatives of having a very much pushed into a corner and thus more aggressive leadership, rather than having a leadership who is offered a meaningful way of still maintaining its legitimacy, and being able to offer its followers some less inflammatory and constructive ways. So yeah.
I appreciate that, because someone such as myself who came back to the research field from the practitioner and the policymaker side, one thing that I've always said and hold myself accountable for is not just to say this issue deserves future research, but actually to communicate what our recommendations are with the data we have. And so I appreciate you taking a stand on these issues and articulating your thoughts on them. We are having more questions come in now. I'd like to open up the floor to a question from Susan Allen. Susan, would you like to read your question, or would you like me to read it?
Hi, I can read the question. I wanted to ask about, as Margarita knows, I'm very interested in coordination and complementarity. And so I was intrigued by the analysis and the results and the recommendations around that. And I guess I'm wondering if you could go into a little more depth about, in those cases, were there some pre-existing coordination complementarity structures already in place that allowed that to work better, or was this quickly built from scratch as a need for an intervention emerged? And what could we do to kind of lay the groundwork for good coordination and complementarity prior to a crisis emerging?
So to be honest, there was not explicit mention of any pre-existing relationship between various actors, but what was kind of implicit from these cases is the ability of the intervening organization to kind of do the scan of the field and understand and see who are the other actors. And also, once there was other initiatives were identified, not to be a competitor to those, but actually provide their expertise and support to already existing initiatives. I think the pre-existing relationship goes again beyond the certain case. What can be inferred, I guess, from all these cases is that, for example, success in the case of let's say Estonia and OSCE's success in that engagement and the type of communication and structures and expertise that was created in that case was helpful in other similar cases, let's say in Macedonia and vice versa. So I think pre-existing relationships among internationals community goes beyond a single case, but kind of transcends across the cases, which is something that I think is less discussed, because when we talk about complementarity and coordination, we usually talk within a specific country context. What is also in addition to that, what is important to harbor those relationships to be pre-existing for other conflict contexts. So I think that was something, a takeaway for me from reviewing these cases.
Thank you. So again, to push this a bit farther, I know that our thinking in the field has really begun to think about the issue of conflict prevention in a different way. And so some of the thinking on that is because there are so much data showing that many prevented conflicts then slide back into violence. And so I was hoping you could speak more a bit about this dynamic. So some of the particular cases that you raised in this survey of the 18 cases have slid back into violence. What do you think this tells us about violence prevention? What could be done differently? And is conflict prevention possible at all?
That's a good question. And like, yes, looking around what's happening in the world, you start question how like even your professional qualities when it comes to conflict prevention. And again, I think I would refer back to saying in let's say in case of Yemen, there is a general consensus that one of the reasons that it kind of slid back into violence after pretty much more or less kind of successful mitigation effort in 2011 was the lack of inclusiveness. While the special envoy, UN Secretary General special envoy, did a fabulous job in trying to branch out and get the insights and input from a wide range of actors, and as they felt that they are included in the process, follow up, it creates certain type of expectations of what the follow-up should look like, which never happened, which contributed to outbreak of the violence, because at this moment people felt that they were asked, that they had voiced their concerns, and then there was no follow-up. I think in case of Ukraine, when we look at what happened, I don't think the international community, they having this passive local factor of Russia being disengaged, there was no effort done of how that this engagement can be sustained and how to address the grievances or potential grievances of the other possible spoilers. So this goes back to the discussion about the commitment of the international community to maintaining momentum and certain type of engagement within conflict context. It is obvious, for obvious reasons, when there is no active warfare, when there are no bullets flying, and there are bullets flying somewhere else, international community kind of shifts to a different direction. And this again talks about the sustainability, about the sustained commitment, not only by the local actors, but also by international actors. And this, again, I'm sorry, I'm referring back to Armenia and Azerbaijan as well, but it is the case with the Armenia, Azerbaijan as well, that there was no sustained engagement in the region which led to a certain type of vacuum that was filled with violence.
Thank you. I myself kind of cut my teeth in the field of international development and humanitarian assistance, and I think that there's an example there that's really relevant to what you said. I remember with the 2004 tsunami, it was incredibly tragic. There were so many loss of lives. However, when you look at the loss of life for one catastrophic event like that, it's also about the equal number loss of life as people who die from malnutrition over about a week's time. And so the levels, the numbers of people dying in one context are roughly equivalent to a week in the other, but one receives a lot more attention, my metaphor here being attention, international engagement. And so as you said, when the bullets are not flying, sustaining that level. I see that we have a lot of people with different practitioner backgrounds, and so I want to make sure I mention that we would really invite other people to share their experiences, both with us on this event in our last 10 minutes, as well as online. If you have experience that you think confirms or detracts from these findings and you think we should incorporate that, we'd love to sit down and talk with you and think about these recommendations as we refine them in this report. I think we have another question coming. Let's see.
Yes, it's from me again. I'm sorry, I couldn't put my mic on before.
That's okay, technological challenges.
And the first name is Kanar. You do pronounce the K, which Margarita probably knows. Anyway, if you have the time, I'm just curious to follow up on your answer from before, because I think most Armenians feel that we are not out of danger. The ceasefire could, as you mentioned in the previous question, things often do backslide. And so what could be done differently next time? Because we do feel that the Ombudsman did try everything to get groups involved to no success. And so what could be done differently in the future to have some international presence? Thank you.
Sure. And with the risk of being labeled as non-Armenian enough or non-patriotic enough, I will still take my professional stand and say that I do believe that we as the Armenian government or the Armenian people should be more proactive in reaching out to international community, because all our appeals happened when the bullets start flying and people start being killed. So I think right now, having that experience, a recent one, I think we should not wait until we slide down back into a violence, but also be proactive. Because previously, I mean, let's face it, we did not put any significant effort or significant enough effort in generating certain type of interest of international community, as we believed on a public level, at least public level, I'm not talking the government level, that we have solved, quote unquote, the conflict by having the status quo that we were able to successfully maintain for given amount of years. So I think at this point, what can or should be done is of active involvement of civil society, as well as the government with the support of civil society, or civil society with the support of the government, of different types of initiatives that will, or targeting international community that will attempt to generate interest in engagement and engagement on a sustainable basis, rather than the OSCE group that we had, which was basically, in a way, pointless shuttle diplomacy back and forth without any tangible involvement. So I think the caveat here is that we should do this work not only when there is an active warfare going on, but at other times where environment can be more conducive for engaging international community. And again, I know this stand might not be popular, but I do believe that we also were not proactive enough when there was this frozen peace situation for a long time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kena, for engaging on a really important question, as well as an issue set that is very important for those of us in the peace building field, as well as personal connections for several people on this call. We only have just a few minutes left, but I think that I had another thing come to mind that's so relevant to what you've just been talking about, and that is the difference between what you call early engagement and something like early warning. Can you make that distinction a bit more clear for us?
Absolutely. So early warning is our ability or the ability of the parties to recognize certain things that are happening to respond, to understand that something big is coming. Again, I'm going to go back to the Armenia-Azerbaijan case that in 2016, we had an escalation, a 4-day war across the contact line. Then we had skirmishes and escalation in July of this past year when we had on the border of the Armenia, like proper international recognized border of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And then we had several military training exercises that Turkey jointly did with Azerbaijan. So those were the early warning signs. So you could see things that were building up to something bigger. And then there was in late July so a big movement in Azerbaijan driven by economic situation that quickly escalated into demand for war. So those were the early warning signs that we recognized. However, there was no engagement at all. There was no, let's say, emergency meeting of the OSCE co-chairs. There was no, let's say, traveling to the capitals and trying to understand what's going on, talking to a wide range of people, like doing fact-finding mission on the ground in both countries to understand where this can lead and have some type of international presence that could have served as a deterring force for the full-blown escalation to happen. So I think that the big distinction is that if you think of it, you see the smoke, but you don't run for your hose. I think that's like what's the difference. Early engagement is the ability to actually be on the ground with your fire truck to set out the fire if it starts. We talk a lot about the early warning and trying to look, but it is about what you do with the early warning signs once they arise and once you're able to recognize them. Because by just pointing out this is happening and this can lead to something is not enough to stop the escalation of the violence.
Thank you very much for that. And I really appreciate the questions we had from the audience. I really appreciate you bringing in such a personally impacting conflict that's going on. It's very important for the Better Evidence Project to be talking about conflicts that have ongoing violence. And I know that we're all hoping that the end goal of research like yours is to mitigating and preventing warfare. And so I want to give a very special thank you for the many hours of work that has gone into this incredible research report. I do invite our participants to access your full report in the link that I've included at the top of the comments section. We will be posting this video to our website in the coming weeks as well. And I'd like to thank the audience for coming, and again, give a very warm thank you to Dr. Tadevosyan for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and I will want to say that I welcome, if you have a chance to look at the report, and I will welcome any feedback or any suggestions how this direction can be improved further. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, our email address for the Better Evidence Project is bep@gmu.edu. You can contact us about this report or anything else at that email address. Thank you very much for joining us today.